Rise above the chaos of the storm and see the world from a perspective of absolute power and clarity. We bring you high-flying stories of freedom and the incredible strength that comes from facing the thunder. Hit subscribe now and let your spirit soar to brand new heights.
The day my brother walked into my hospital room with a bouquet of white lilies, I knew he hadn't come to see if I was alive. He'd come to confirm that I wasn't. I'll get back to that moment. But first, you need to understand something about my brother. About the kind of person who can look his little sister in the eyes and smile while he's planning to bury her. His name is Derek. He's 41 years old. He coaches youth baseball on weekends, grills burgers at every family barbecue, and tells the same 3 jokes at every Thanksgiving table. Everyone loves Derek. Everyone has always loved Derek, and for most of my life I loved him too. I'm Claire. I'm 32. I work as a physical therapist at a rehabilitation center in Asheville, North Carolina. I'm not famous, I'm not rich. But 18 months ago, our mother passed away and left behind a house, a modest investment account, and a life insurance policy that was split equally between the two of us. That's when Derek changed. Or maybe that's when I finally stopped pretending he hadn't always been this way. Our mother's name was Ruth. She was the kind of woman who kept a spare key under the mat for the neighbor's teenager and baked casseroles for anyone going through a hard time. She worked 30 years as a school librarian. She didn't have much, but what she had, she poured into us. When she died of a stroke in February of last year, Derek and I each inherited roughly $114,000, plus equal shares of her house in Brevard, about 40 minutes from where I lived. The house needed work. Derek said we should sell it fast, take whatever we could get. I wanted to hold on to it, maybe fix it up, because it was the last piece of our mother I had left. We argued about it. Not badly, not at first. Just 2 siblings with different ideas about grief and money. Normal stuff. But Derek's idea of compromise turned out to be something different than mine. By August, I started noticing things. Small things. A message from my bank about a login attempt from an unfamiliar device. A piece of mail that had clearly been opened and resealed. A conversation with our mother's estate attorney where he mentioned Derek had called twice asking questions about the policy structure, about what would happen to my share if I died without a will. I didn't have a will. I told myself it was nothing. Derek was just being Derek, trying to manage things, be the older brother, take control. That was his way. I made a mental note to get a will drawn up and moved on with my life. That was my first mistake. The second mistake was agreeing to go hiking with him in October. Derek suggested it about 2 weeks before it happened. A day trip up to Black Balsam Knob, one of the balds along the Art Lobe Trail. We'd hiked it together as kids with our father, before our parents divorced. It felt like an olive branch. I thought maybe he was trying to repair things between us after all the arguing about the house. I thought maybe grief was finally softening him the way it had softened me. I packed my day pack the night before. Trail mix, 2 water bottles, a light jacket. It was mid-October, cool but not cold. The forecast said partly cloudy, low 50s at elevation. Standard fall hiking weather in the southern Appalachians. We drove up together. Derek talked the whole way about his son's baseball tournament, about his wife Karen's sister visiting for the holidays, about nothing that mattered. He was relaxed, easy, the version of him I remembered from childhood. We hit the trailhead around 9 in the morning. The first 2 miles were fine. We fell into the old rhythm of it, pointing out the ridge views, complaining about our knees the way people our age do now. Around mile 3, the weather shifted faster than either of us expected. A front was moving in. The temperature dropped hard, maybe 15 degrees in under an hour. The wind picked up. I hadn't brought enough layers. I told Derek I was cold. Really cold. The kind of cold that gets into your fingers and doesn't let go. He said we were almost at the summit, just a little farther. We kept going. I don't know exactly when I realized something was wrong with my body. The shivering had stopped, which I knew from my training as a healthcare professional was not a good sign. My thoughts were coming slow, like trying to read underwater. My feet felt like they belonged to someone else. I sat down on a rock at the exposed bald near the summit and I told Derek I needed to stop. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said he was going to check the trail just ahead, see how much farther to the shelter. He walked around the bend. He didn't come back. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. I called his name. The wind swallowed it. I tried to stand and my legs didn't cooperate the way I needed them to. I got my phone out and I had 1 bar, barely enough, and I called 911 and told them where I was before the call dropped. The next thing I remember clearly is a rescue worker's face above mine and a foil emergency blanket crinkling around my shoulders. I had moderate hypothermia. My core temperature had dropped to 93 degrees. The rescue team found me because of the 911 call. They told me later that another 45 minutes exposed on that ridge and the outcome would have been very different. Derek told the sheriff's deputy that we had gotten separated, that he had gone to look for help and lost his way in the deteriorating conditions, that he had been frantic with worry. He told the story with tears in his eyes, and I was told he looked absolutely convincing. I was in the hospital in Asheville for 3 days. Derek visited once, on the second day, with those white lilies. He stood in the doorway of my room and he said, and I will never forget this, as long as I live, Claire Bear, you had us all so scared. And he hugged me, and over his shoulder I stared at the wall and thought about the way he had looked at me on that rock before he walked away. That look hadn't been fear. I said nothing. I smiled. I said I was just glad to be okay. I watched him leave. That night I lay in the dark and I thought about the bank login attempt, the open mail, the questions to the estate attorney about what happened to my share if I died without a will. And I thought about the fact that I still didn't have a will. I called my friend Nadia the next morning. Nadia is an attorney, not an estate attorney. She does employment law, but she's sharp and she knows people, and most importantly, I trusted her completely. I told her everything, the trail, Derek, walking away, the timeline, the questions he'd asked the estate attorney. She was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then she said, Claire, I need you to listen to me carefully. Do not leave that hospital until we talk to someone. And do not tell Derek anything. Nadia drove to Asheville that afternoon. She brought with her a colleague named Marcus who handled estate litigation and had, in a previous life, worked as an investigator for an insurance defense firm. He knew how these things worked from multiple angles. Over the next 4 days, while I was still recovering, the 3 of us built something. Marcus contacted the estate attorney and confirmed the nature of Derek's inquiries. He pulled the timeline of Derek's calls. Twice in September, once in early October, 3 weeks before the hike. He spoke to a ranger at the Pisgah district who confirmed that the weather window that day had been unusual, a fast-moving front that experienced hikers in the area would have known to watch. Derek had hiked that trail 14 times. He knew the mountain. Nadia helped me draft a will, properly witnessed and notarized, right there in my hospital room, in which I left my share of everything to a charitable trust and specifically excluded Derek from any inheritance. We had it filed before I was discharged. I also did 2 other things on the advice of Marcus. First, I opened a new bank account at a different institution and transferred my liquid assets there. Second, I changed the locks on my apartment and updated my emergency contact at work to Nadia instead of Derek. Derek didn't know any of this. When I was discharged, I called him. I thanked him for coming to see me. I told him I was doing better. I told him the doctors had said it was just bad luck with the weather. My voice was steady. I'd always been a decent actress when I needed to be. Growing up with Derek, you learn to control what you showed. He sounded relieved, almost cheerful. These things happen in the mountains, he said. You just need to be more careful, Claire Bear. I said I knew. I said I would be. What I didn't tell him was that Marcus had gone back to that trail. The section where Derek claimed to have gotten lost trying to find help is a well-marked path. There is a trail blaze every 100 feet. There is a visible shelter less than a quarter mile from where I was found. A person who had hiked that trail 14 times would not get lost on it. A person who was genuinely searching for help for a hypothermic sibling would not end up back at the trailhead parking lot, where Derek's car was found, where the ranger confirmed Derek had been seen getting into his vehicle at approximately 12:40 in the afternoon. I was found by the rescue team at 1:15. Derek had been in his car for 35 minutes while I was losing consciousness on the mountain. The sheriff's office had already quietly flagged the incident as suspicious based on the 911 call timeline discrepancy. Marcus's information gave them what they needed to upgrade that flag. But here is the part that I want you to sit with for a moment, because this is the part that still takes my breath away when I think about it. 3 weeks after I was discharged from the hospital, Derek called me and said he thought we should finally sort out the estate. The house. He said a buyer had expressed interest and maybe it was time to just be done with it. Move forward, stop letting it drag on. He said he could have his attorney handle the paperwork if I just signed over power of attorney to him temporarily. Power of attorney. To him. While a sheriff's detective was already building a case file, I told him I needed a few days to think about it. I asked him to send me whatever documents he had in mind. He emailed them to me that same evening. I forwarded everything to Nadia and Marcus before I even read through it fully. What Marcus found in those documents was a clause, buried in the third page, that would have given Derek authority to act on my behalf in all financial matters, with no time limit specified and no oversight requirement. Combined with my lack of a formal will at the time of the hiking incident, what Derek appeared to have been building toward was a structure where he could access, liquidate, and transfer my inheritance with minimal legal friction. He'd had this drafted before the hike. The date on the document was September 28th. The hike was October 14th. When Nadia saw that date, she said very quietly, "That wasn't improvisation, that was a plan." She was right. The detective assigned to the case, a woman named Detective Okafor, met with me the following Tuesday. I brought Nadia. I brought every document, every screenshot, every piece of the timeline we had assembled. Detective Okafor was methodical and calm, and she asked excellent questions, and I could tell by the way she organized her notes that she had already been thinking along the same lines. She told me she needed a little more time. She asked me not to confront Derek, not to change my behavior toward him in any noticeable way. I said I could do that. What Detective Okafor didn't tell me, and what I found out later, was that during those 2 weeks she had obtained Derek's phone records, spoken to a financial crimes investigator, and confirmed with the estate attorney, under subpoena, the full content of Derek's inquiries, which had included a direct question about whether a surviving sibling could contest a will if they were the only living heir. He had been counting on being the only living heir. I want to tell you about the morning it ended, because that morning is the one I come back to whenever I need to remember that the truth does surface, eventually, even when you think it's been buried too deep. Derek called me on a Wednesday morning in late November and said he was coming into Asheville to run some errands and did I want to grab lunch? Normal. Easy. The Derek who grills burgers at barbecues. I said sure. I said to come by my apartment first. What Derek didn't know was that Nadia was already parked down the street. What he didn't know was that Detective Okafor and her partner were parked 1 block over. What he didn't know was that the financial crimes warrant had been signed the day before. He knocked on my door at 11:47. I opened it. He was wearing a Patagonia vest and holding a coffee cup and smiling the smile he'd been smiling at me my whole life. I stepped aside to let him in. He walked in, looked around my living room, and started talking about a barbecue restaurant he wanted to try for lunch. Detective Okafor knocked on the door 40 seconds later. I will never forget the way Derek's face changed. It wasn't like the movies where people look caught or cornered and dramatic. It was more like watching a program close on a computer screen. Just a shutdown. Everything that had been animated in his face went still. Detective Okafor identified herself and read him his rights. Her partner was at the back door. Derek looked at me once. I held his gaze. I didn't look away. I didn't say anything. I had already said everything I needed to say, in affidavits and documented timelines and a will that had been properly filed 6 weeks earlier. Derek was charged with attempted murder, financial fraud, and conspiracy. His attorney has entered a not guilty plea. The trial is scheduled for next spring. The power of attorney documents, the phone records, the ranger's testimony about the parking lot timestamp, the estate attorney's deposition, all of it is now part of a case file that Detective Okafor described to me as, and I'm quoting here, unusually well documented for a case that came to us the way this one did. I've thought a lot about what I want to say about my brother, not to the court, Nadia handles that, but to you, because I think some of you know exactly what I'm describing. Even if your story looks different from the outside, there's a specific kind of grief that comes with realizing that someone you loved was never entirely safe to love. That the person who sat across from you at every holiday table, who called you Claire Bear, who taught you to throw a baseball in the backyard, that person was also capable of walking away while you lost consciousness in the cold. Both of those things are true. That's the part that doesn't resolve cleanly. I don't spend much time trying to figure out when Derek became who he is. I spent a lot of years doing that math, going back through memories, looking for the hinge point. I'm not doing that anymore. What I know is who he showed me he was on October 14th, and I chose to believe what he showed me. That's the only version of this story I want to carry forward. Our mother's house is still in probate, given the ongoing legal proceedings, but my attorney tells me that once the estate is settled, the assets will be protected under the terms of the will I filed from my hospital bed. Ruth would have hated all of this. She would have been heartbroken. But she also raised a daughter who documents things, who has good friends, who knew to call 911 from a mountain ridge with 1 bar of signal before the cold took her under. I think she'd be okay with how this part turned out. To anyone listening who has a family member who makes you feel like you're always miscounting, always misremembering, always somehow wrong about what you saw, I want to say this directly. You are not miscounting. You saw what you saw. Write it down, screenshot it, tell someone you trust. And please, please, get your will done. The people who want to take from you are counting on you not having your paperwork in order. Get your paperwork in order. My name is Claire. I'm 32 years old and I'm still here. And I am not done. If this story reached you today, stay. There's more on this channel, and if you've ever had to protect yourself from someone who was supposed to protect you, you already know that the hardest part isn't surviving. The hardest part is letting yourself believe afterward that you deserve to. You did. You do.